Welcome back to Grow Your Impact, Income, and Influence, the number one show on the internet for small business growth. If you are a solo entrepreneur, you are in the right place. Even if you have a small team, you're going to do really, really well here. My name's Steve Warner. I am your host. Today, I am joined by Raven M. Harris. She is amazing. She helps millennial entrepreneurs, mostly women, figure out what their main calling is in life, what their big why is, and at the same time shows them how to make more money. She has an awesome podcast called Reset with Raven. If you guys want to check it out, it's in the show notes down below. Raven, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thank you, Steve, for having me.
No problem. It is my pleasure. So, we talked a little bit off camera before we came on, and you've had a pretty cool experience getting to where you are. You teach leadership, you help women kind of break out of, what am I doing? The funk that they're floating around in. But what I really want to know is, how did you get started with this? Because usually we coach people on the same journey that we had. So kind of walk me through, where did this all start for you? Did you have a moment where you just woke up one day and you were like, I'm not working no more. I'm going to do my own thing, what I really want to do? How'd it go for you?
The Great Awakening, huh? So, like many people, 2020 was an awakening for me. So, let me just tell you a little bit about my backstory and really how I arrived to where I am today. So, almost a year ago, I was working in a critical illness recovery hospital in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And I was the interim chief executive officer of this particular hospital during the pandemic. And I was a patient advocate for many patients, but I was the patient advocate for one patient who reminded me of myself. This particular patient had a C2 spinal injury, which means they were paralyzed from the neck down, what we call in healthcare complete quad. And the patient looked like me. The patient was the same age as me. And the patient was in a freak accident that really changed their life. And I remember being in that hospital room. I would FaceTime with their mom. I would FaceTime with their daughter and some of their siblings. And this was one of the experiences where even when I was in the rooms, when I was talking, giving the family updates, because at the time there was no visitation, I remember I had to hold back tears. And I remember how I felt. And I remember, we all think that we have time, and we do, but how much of it? And this really, 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 it affected me. It affected me.
So when you say, first off, that's pretty powerful, right? Seeing anybody that we can put ourselves in their shoes and be like, man, you're learning the life lesson without having to, have the injury or become paralyzed. I can imagine how that would bring up some tears for sure, and how that would be emotional. So so you called it your Great Awakening. What happened? What did you do? Did this take a little bit of time and you just decided you needed to move on? What happened?
So for me, what happened was it went back to time, right? I thought that I had so much time to live out my dreams. And this patient and I, when I would go in their room, they would just cry and feel like their life is over. And I remember thinking, I have my whole life ahead of me. I have my limbs. I have my voice. I'm able to walk, think, talk. But what am I doing with my life? This is not my dream. Walking through this hospital every day, though I'm doing meaningful work, this is not my dream. And I felt like a fish out of water. I felt like there was something bigger, something greater in terms of impact that I was supposed to do. And I said, you know what? Now is the time. Now is the time for you to have your own reset, to have your own transition. And it definitely took time. I call it 50-50 faith. There was 50% of me was like, oh, 110%, let's go. Let's make that next leap. And then the other 50% of me was filled with fear. But I knew that I couldn't live in regret. because there will be a day where I'm in one of those hospital beds, and I want to know that I didn't have any regrets and that I didn't resent myself for not taking that leap of faith. So I resigned.
That's pretty awesome. One of my favorite quotes, which I've shared a couple times on here, but I'll say because it fits. I think I want to say it's Jim Rohn. He says you have two choices. You have the choice, or there are two different pains. You have the pain of regret or the pain of discipline and taking action, right? And that's, I mean, you just exemplified that perfectly. So how was it like? Did you write a resignation letter?
I did. And I want to say also too, I didn't make this decision like quickly either. And it took a lot of prayer, meditation, and I talked to a very select few people about, what I was thinking about, because I knew I didn't want too many people to cloud my judgment when it comes to making a decision like this. But I knew it's one of those things where I knew I owed it to myself. I owed it to myself to make sure that I live full. And when you were thinking about talking about quotes, it's a very, I think, had I not been in a hospital environment during a pandemic, I wouldn't have made that decision. But when you see so many people passing away and dying every day, it changes your outlook on life. It changes your perspective. And I remember the late, great Dr. Miles Monroe has often said, one of the wealthiest places on the earth is a cemetery. Unlived dreams, untapped gifts. And when you're seeing people that look like you, that are the same age as you, that their entire lives have been turned upside down, whether they're paralyzed or whether they're passing away, and they didn't get to live their dreams, I said, who am I not to go after what I know is already inside of me because of fear? And I really believe that, when it comes to fear, someone told me, they were like, you know what, even if you fall, you'll find your wings on the way down, but you got to fly, you got to do this. And of course, Raven with the bird. So I was like, that's good.
That is good. So I mean, you just walked the listeners through some great points. The first one that I want to call out is you didn't talk to everybody about this. You talked to people that I don't think you picked people that would tell you to do it or not do it, but you picked selected people that you trusted. I think a lot of people, I know when I left my job in 2013, as people found out about it, I left a six-figure corporate job, and people were like, what are you doing? And like, I put like really solid walls up where I just had conversations. I was like, please don't talk to me about my job or my career or what I'm doing. Like, I appreciate your friendship, or, I appreciate that you're in my family, because there were family members who did it, but this is what I am doing. And if you can't be on board with it, I don't want to lose our friendship over it. Just, we're not going to talk about it. Nowadays I have a list of about 6 people. So this is a training I'll give anyone on this podcast. So Julie Stolian taught me this. It's you draw a cross on a paper, right? In the upper left goes 2 to 3 influencers. In the upper right goes 2 or 3 friends. In the bottom left goes 2 or 3 employees. And on the bottom right goes 2 or 3 customers. Those are the only people that are allowed to give you feedback on anything outside of that list, because that way it's not like shiny object, right? And that served me really well. I learned that like 4 years ago, and I was like, oh my goodness, I still have it. I have it here on my desk. And I always ask myself, if I'm listening to something, I'm like, are they on that list? Because you can still learn, right? I still watch some YouTube videos or whatever, but am I really going to listen and implement? Not if they're not on that list.
I love
So,
that you bring that up, because I call them my Fab Five, my top 5, or my board of governors who
mhm.
I talk to this about. And the thing about, when it comes to vision, everyone else wasn't given the vision. So their opinions sometimes, even though, and as you mentioned, family, even though well intended, they don't see what you see. They don't have that inner tug, or I call it that download, that I knew, like, I mean, burning inside of me, like, Raven, you have to go. You'll be upset with you if you don't take this leap of faith. The job will be there, healthcare will be there. If that's something that you need to return to, it will be there. But this opportunity, this time in your life will not be there. And I love that you said that, like, you have your 6 people. I call them my fab 5. These are my board of governors, and these are the people that I'm going to talk to, because other people will give you maybe well intended, but advice that's not appropriate for your particular situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then you didn't make a snap decision, right? I'm going to throw stones at Grant Cardone a little bit here. People say, decisions are made in an instant, blah, blah, blah. No, they're not. They're made, well, good decisions are made with some time, because you weigh the outcomes, you think about different things, and then you make the decision that you can commit to. Any decision that I think anyone has stuck with for a long period of time requires some form of thought. It might be 24 hours, it might be a week. I think anything beyond a week gets a little bit long, and like you start to lose momentum with the decision maybe. But how long was your decision? That's where I wanted to go with this. How long did it take you from like having some of these conversations with this patient to thinking about it to then writing the resignation letter? And then what I really want to know is, how long did it take from the time you wrote the letter to the time you submitted it?
Oh, that's a great question. So I saw the patient for weeks, quite frankly. What really was like the nail in the coffin for me was on my birthday. My birthday is Juneteenth, June 19th, and I remember like a feeling of I was thinking about life expectancy. And my cousin is a mortician. He's a licensed funeral director. So we talk about death and life all the time. And I started thinking about, like, Raven, a third of your life is already gone. What will you do with the next 2/3? So it was my birthday, Friday, June 19th, where I made the decision. And the resignation letter, even though I was starting to put some things in place, didn't come for about a month after that. But I started preparing and positioning myself after that. So it took me a while to come to that decision, but it was my birthday where I was like, oh, I remember thinking, I can't go into another birthday, another year of life, because when you're seeing so many people pass away and die, you start to think about life. And I thought about the turning of a new year for a new birthday, new experiences. I felt that this is the time you have to do it now. So my birthday was what made me actually, okay, start today, call the moving company. That's the date I called the moving company.
So what? Okay, that was actually going to be my next question. How did you go? How did you move? Because I mean, Phoenix is an all right place. I've spent some time there. It's hot in the summer, but I mean, it's nice in the winter. How did you make the decision to move, and why was that there? And like, how did this unfold? Walk us through it.
Yeah, so in terms of moving, I am very fortunate that I have a super supportive parents. I am an only child, and it's so funny because we laugh about it. I was like, I haven't lived at home in 13 years. So my parents welcomed me back in and said, until you can figure out what your next is, you're welcome to my dad calls it visit. You're welcome to visit here as long as you like. So that was my next landing place. I came back home after having living here over 13 years, moving company, flight, everything. It was actually even my first flight during the pandemic. So it was interesting. I actually took some pictures of how like sparse the airport was during that time. But that's how I made that transition. I moved everything with a moving company, and then I flew and then had my car shipped.
Nice. I mean, that is a step for sure. Were your parents? I have to ask. Are your parents, like, obviously they're supportive as income move in? Are they on your list? Are they on your
Oh
list of your
yeah,
Fab Five? Okay.
they are. We're pretty tight. We're pretty tight. And also too, as I told them the decision that I was making, they even made the comment, I'm surprised you didn't do it sooner.
They know you pretty well then. That's pretty
They know
awesome.
me well, and it's interesting how like things in life foreshadow what's to come, because I remember just a little bit of background. When I was in undergrad, I was pre-med. In my senior year, I was so annoyed. I think I was like in a physics class and like a biochemistry class, and I was like miserable. And my roommate said, she was like, you know why you're miserable, right? You were meant to explain the product or sell the product or be on the cover for the product. You're not supposed to be in the lab mixing chemicals. That's why you're miserable. And I kind of laughed it off and ignored it, but she was right. I'm not meant for the behind the scenes. That's not the way I'm built. That's not the way I designed. That's not where I even get like my energy from like mixing chemicals, being in a lab. I was out of purpose. I was out of alignment, and that's why I was miserable. And she saw that years ago.
Got it. That's awesome. That is awesome. Like people, it's funny how people like see different pieces of us in our past. I've had people come up to me and be like, when you were doing XYZ and 15 years ago, I knew that you were going to be huge. Or I knew that this was going to happen or whatever. It's really, really interesting. Are you enjoying this episode? Do you want to know how you can tell better stories and use story selling in your business? Check the description down below for my free story selling course. This blueprint gives you everything you need to start using story selling in your business. All right, let's jump back to the episode. So what happened after you move? Like, how did you start taking steps? And like, tell me about some of the people that you've worked with and like some of the stuff that you're doing to create change. Cause I think it's awesome that you're working with millennial women. I think they need it a lot. Right. And I don't know how to reach them. They're not my audience, but I think that I've had plenty of conversations. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like, but I want to know what happened once you got there and started the business and started moving. Cause it's a
So
pandemic, right? I
yeah,
mean,
and to answer your question, there was no started moving once I moved home. I remember when I first moved home, to just really be quite frank, I remember like my identity was shaken. There's a transition that many people go through when it comes from transitioning from employee to entrepreneur. And there's a difference in mindset. And also, too, I think just to kind of add some context or color around what was going on, like I became the interim CEO of this particular hospital the first Monday in March. And then the pandemic really imploded about a week or two later. So I had gone through my own type of trauma just in terms of being in a hospital environment with all of this happening. And it wasn't until I talked with some people, hired my own life coach and things like that, that they were, share with me that maybe you need to do some of your own grieving of just what you left and what you are now transitioning into. And the initial thing for me that I had to realize is that my entire identity had been attached to my job and to my title because quite frankly, I felt pretty accomplished. I was the interim CEO of a hospital before the age of 29. And now, when you are starting something different, it felt like, oh, I'm starting over. And there was a point where I was discrediting my accomplishments, my knowledge, my experiences, because it's like, well, I'm in a completely different space. And I also, too, geographically, I'm in a different space. So the first few months, I really took some time to just relax my mind, try to get at peace with everything, this major transition that I had just gone through. And then afterwards, I hired my own coach and did a lot of self work, inner work, and started thinking about where I wanted to be of impact. And for me, I think the biggest impact that I can have in other young professionals' lives is helping emerging leaders, helping those young professionals figure out how to have that. I like to call it work life rhythm or work
mhm.
life integration. I don't believe there's balance, but I call it the work life rhythm. And I also went through my own coaching certification so I could understand the foundations of how to be a professional coach. And what I'm working with right now is a millennial women. I actually do have, and people ask, well, do you work with men too? I actually do have two males that have reached out to me as well. So I work with males as well, but my primary target or ideal client are women. But a lot of people, I'm finding that they're trying to find that, I call it professional and purpose alignment. How do
Mhm.
I find something that's meaningful and also to where I get paid well? When you think about the millennial generation, just even data as well as from personal experience and from people that I'm working with and talking with, this generation is often underemployed, unemployed, and has the most student debt. So
Mhm.
finding a role, whether it's a role within a company or whether it's being an entrepreneur that pays you for your gifts and talents and that pays you well, quite frankly, compensates you well, is I think a challenge for a lot of millennials. So working with people to get clarity on what does that next role or opportunity look like, and then a strategy for actually being able to pursue that next opportunity. But what I'm finding is that most people, if I ask them, okay, well, what is your ideal role? They don't know.
That's I have friends who own a company, and they have about 80 employees under them. It's an app company, but they have found, and I thought this was really interesting to your point exactly. I think a lot of people in the millennial generation, they're floating around. They've been told, don't work too hard or just work for the money, or like people in my family have that comment. That's where I'm getting that. But what they have found in their business is when they give the person the identity of like you're important and they make them feel good. That's something that a lot of millennials never got in high school and college. Like they didn't have a solid identity, and they definitely didn't have like either a provider identity or a I need to make money identity, right? It's a little bit different from my generation. The It's really interesting to hear you talk about that, because I do think that's the big thing. Because once they have an identity, they want, like, we all want to feel like we are doing something meaningful. Every human being has that like implanted in us. And I think when you're floating around, you're missing that. But the minute you have an identity that makes you feel purpose, you push forward into it. Um, so you talked a little bit about your identity. I know when I left my corporate job, I moved. I moved to a small town in the middle of nowhere where I didn't know anybody. And like literally I had like a to your point about grieving, I don't know what I would call it, but I wrote down all the pieces that I identified with my old identity, and I wrote them on pieces of paper and burned them like one at a time, and had like we set like a dream lantern that floats away, and like had like a ceremony like saying goodbye to that, because my identity had been wrapped up in that for a long time, right? But I knew that in order to shift, I needed to let go of it. So congratulations, like you did a lot of things that were really amazing. So talk to me a little bit about some of the changes that you've seen with clients that you've worked with, people that you've helped, because you're relatively new to the space, but you have your stuff together and you know what you're doing and you've taken the right steps. So talk to me a little bit about some of the people that you've helped and some of the changes that you've seen.
I think the biggest thing is, again, identifying what they want. If you don't have a target, then it's one of those things like anything will do if you don't know your direction. So helping people get very clear on what does that ideal role or that next look like. Another thing that I work with clients on is doing their DISC assessment. For me, I'm a high C, and everyone has some of the D, the I, the S, the C in them, as you know, and it's understanding though how you naturally operate and then what's your adaptive style, and knowing how to utilize those to your strength. So for example, as a high C, I'm a very high C. I'm analytical. I one of the words you'll hear is like perfectionist, and understanding, okay, how is this a gift, and then also to how might that hold you back. For example, being a high C, sometimes it's like you'll overanalyze or analysis paralysis and do nothing. So one of the things that I work well with clients on is that self awareness, knowing where there's some areas where things that you are talented in or are natural habits or traits of you may also be something that you need to just be aware of, because it can hinder you from moving forward. So that's a really good thing. And then another thing that I work with clients on, it's called the gains and losses. And It's basically when you're trying to decide whether or not to make a decision or whether or not to do something, put it, what would you gain by doing this and what would you lose by doing this? And oftentimes what people find, and this has happened to me so many times, is that the thing that you thought, oh my gosh, if I do this, it's such a big deal. It's like, are you really lose? Or if I don't do this, it's such a loss for me. Are you really losing anything? Or you'll find the things that you thought you were losing, they're really not that grand. And I think putting things on paper has been so valuable for me. I call it better out than in. And that's in different like journaling activities, gains and losses activities, skill set inventory activities, where people are able to organize their thoughts. Another thing with the millennial generation is that we are experiencing more stress, more anxiety, more depression than any other generation. And a lot of times it's because we have so many racing thoughts in our heads that we haven't organized these things on paper. And then you know what? Sometimes it's something you organize on paper, get it out of your head and just throw it away. And sometimes it's depending on what it is, it's something you'll go back to and revisit in a few days once you've actually got it out of your system. So a lot of guided writing activities I found have been really helpful with clients. And it just depends on where they are, where they feel stuck, or where they need some action or a little bit of push.
Awesome. That's I'm a huge I tell everybody they should journal because I think that's I have 6 whiteboards and I have a whiteboard for everything because there's like, well, there's one for ideas, there's one for projects I'm working on, there's one for people, but it gets it out of my head. And I think that is one of the things that allows me to sit down and focus when I'm working, right? Because if I have an idea, I'll just get up and write it on the board and then I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. It doesn't take up space. I also love the DISC assessment. So that's like it's a super super powerful tool to help people, and I think just taking people through that. Do you mind sharing, I know you can't give away too much information because they're clients, but do you mind sharing like just one of the breakthroughs that somebody had? Because I know when I did mine, like it allowed, like I was like, oh my goodness, that's why I think this way, and that's okay, and these are my strengths, and I don't need to focus on my weaknesses, just focus on strengths. And now that I know what they are, like it kind of made things very clear and gave me permission to move forward. Do you have some stories like that of people that you've taken through DISC?
I would say one of the things that jumps out to me is working with someone who is in high D. So, high Ds, you can think of them as very assertive, natural leaders. However, sometimes the details they're not as concerned with. So, one of the things, for example, a particular client is looking for a team or a VA, a salesperson to add to their particular team. So when I was going through their DISC assessment, I was sharing with them that when you are looking for your future team members, be sure that you hire someone who is very detail oriented because that is not an area that's one of your natural strengths. So when you are hiring people around you and you are building your team, and even when you have friendships and relationships, knowing where other people have strengths, where it's just not something that just comes natural to you. They're very big picture, go, 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 but you miss some things along the way in terms of high execution, but missing things that really would make it more quality and a better experience for customers or clients. One of the things I share with them is making sure that they hire people that are detail oriented to keep a steady pace and to make sure things are done right along the way. So I think knowing how to bring people around you that have some areas of strength that you don't have is one of the things that I do when I work with people on their DISC assessment.
Awesome. If you had to guess what my DISC is, what would you guess it to be?
Oh, goodness.
No perfection allowed. You can't be perfectionistic.
The I and the S are coming out for me. I'm getting, I think you're a high people person. And I think you're a natural leader as well. Not sure which one what is your dominant? Let's see. Hmm.
That's all right. You did pretty well. I don't want to put you on the spot too much. Um,
Yeah, I is coming out to me. Where do you fall on the DISC assessment? Now I'm curious.
sure. So I am a 99D. I'm a 95I. I am a it's yeah, it was 99, 95, 14, 2
Oh
or
wow.
214, sorry. So I'm very polarized and like very I'm very people oriented. I'm very action oriented. Very very big picture. Details is definitely not my thing. Although I've forced myself through routines, right? So we were just talking about whiteboards. The reason that they're there is because it allows me to see what details I need.
Mm,
And the team members that I've put around me, we also have we have mind maps and processes, and I follow my own processes. Like freedom and structure is one of the most profound statements I think anyone could ever make about anything. Like if you have structure to something, it allows you freedom inside of it. So like my day is time blocked, but then inside of those time blocks, I can do whatever I want. Um, Same with like my morning routine. Like morning routine gives me a structure that starts my day off very well, but inside of that there's freedom to move around, and it gives me the freedom to not stress about stuff. Having too many choices is not freedom. um anyway, that's a whole different story. um Tell me, if somebody wanted to take a disc test, where do you send them to?
there's some that are free online. I work with a program. It's a paid service that I utilize. So I don't know if I want to send them there, but there's some free ones online, and you could just Google DISC unless you're doing it through a particular coach or program.
I think you guys, if you're listening to this and you want help, you should reach out to Raven because she obviously knows her stuff, and she'll be able to help you out. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. If you guys have been listening and you want to check out her podcast, again, it is Reset with Raven. It is in the show notes below. You should definitely check it out. Tell me about a little bit of what you do on your podcast.
So, the first season, we are coming to a close, and it was all about how to successfully navigate a reset in career, business, or life. So, season two will be launching in October. I'm super excited about that, and still working on what the reset in that will be. But the reason why reset came is because I went through my own reset, and I believe the entire world is going through a reset. And I always say that we're in three buckets. You either are in a reset, you're coming out of a reset, or you're about to go into a reset. So there's some information in there for everybody in terms of how to successfully navigate a reset.
Awesome. Well, Raven, thank you so much for coming on. To all of you out there listening, make sure you check out her podcast. Go take a disc assessment. Just email her the results. She'll probably help you with it. It has been great having you on. To everyone else, take action, change lives, and make money. We will see you next week.